Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Chadwick. And today we have Lisa Crispin with us to talk about mob testing and mob acceptance testing. And so, Lisa, maybe you could introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about that, and then we can go into our topics.
Well, thanks, Chris and Austin. It's quite an honor to be here. I was really happy to be invited, and yeah, I've been interested in mob programming and testing, which now I like to call ensemble programming and testing. And I'm just this morning on a Cucumber test-driven development panel discussion that was broadcast this morning. I heard Emily Beisch. I'm not sure if that's how she says her name, but she also called it ensemble programming.
Nice.
So a kinder, gentler name. But
I like that.
anyway, I've been interested in it for a few years now, and have enjoyed going to the mob programming conference in the Boston area, and talking with Woody and Lisa Hawk and all the people I know who are really into it and learning from them. And so I have done it some with various teams. I was on the Pivotal Tracker team, and I'm currently working at OutSystems as we call ourselves quality owners. I don't really like that word, but basically quality coaches. I'm focused on helping to build an observability practice, but I also help just generally, we're trying to help all the engineering teams become autonomous with their own testing and do a great job of building quality in. And so we're starting to see a lot more pairing and ensembling, and that's really exciting.
Nice.
And I live in Vermont on a farm with my donkeys, so.
Can we have them on the show?
Yeah, I brought them into, last week I did a meetup for the modern test automation meetup, and I brought I got my husband to bring one of the donkeys in during the Q&A.
Nice.
Excellent.
So I actually I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the ensemble name. I like that name because in ensemble methods in machine learning, they typically they can be an ensemble of similar algorithms or an ensemble of different algorithms. And
cool.
And so what I like about that is that it implies that you will have different skill sets maybe in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it's a cool name. I hadn't heard that before, but I like the connotation that it comes along with it. Sounds good. So Austin, you were saying?
Oh no, yeah, I was just gonna segue into so what were your first experiences with mobbing and testing? So what kind of got you started, so to speak?
I want to say it was an Agile Alliance conference. I can't think of the name of it now, but several years ago, and during the open space, there was a mobbing session going on, and I just joined in to see what it was like, and I immediately could see the power of it, like you say, having the different skill sets, and the quick switching of roles so that people remain focused and really engaged. And then if you do get freaked out, like, I can't take this anymore, I want to go look something up, you're free to leave and go do that. So yeah, then I started really reading up on it and learning more about it, and seeing how it could be applied also in a testing perspective or testing context.
Awesome. Yeah, and actually that leads me to my next question. So whether you're saying ensemble or mob programming, I'll hear people also say sometimes, and maybe our viewers might have a similar question or confusion, is, I guess in your mind, what's the distinction between ensemble programming and mob programming versus ensemble testing and mob testing? Like, what happens differently in mob testing than happens in mob programming?
I think it can be exactly the same, just exactly the same format. I've used some different formats.
Okay.
Mainly I've used different formats because sometimes it's hard to get people to really go whole hog on it. But so for example, we did a really cool thing when I was on the Pivotal Tracker team, is we realized we had a problem. We had a lot of small teams that were 1 or 2 or 3 developer pairs working pretty autonomously, and sharing a tester and designer between different teams, and sharing a product owner. And the problem is they put their stories into, we're finished now, it needs to be accepted, the product owner was busy, and so then you'd have this bottleneck of they're not accepted, we can't merge the code, we really want to merge the code before we start new stuff. And so we had this idea to do Ensemble acceptance testing. And so when a developer pair had 4 or 5 stories ready to go, and they were all related, all for one feature, we'd get them, the product owner, the designer, the tester, and a customer support representative in a room together, or it could be a virtual room, and go through the stories. And we did it. We changed the format from traditional mob programming. We didn't switch driver navigator every few minutes. We did it by story. Okay, we're gonna do acceptance testing on one story, and that's gonna take about 5 minutes. And we had the benefits of having the different perspectives and everybody in the room that needed to answer a question. Whatever question we had, that person's in the room at what Woody calls the 0 question queue time, I think. And that's really powerful, because when you're acceptance testing a story, you might have a question about the UI design or error handling or functionality, whatever it is. You've got the person right there. And so we would switch roles after each story, and within 30 minutes we could get through 4 or 5 stories and either accept them or reject them, and we're done, and everybody could move on. And everyone really loved it. That was easily taken on as a practice because it just made so much sense.
There's something cathartic about being lean.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Nice. And what led, was it just someone on the team's idea? Like, hey, let's just get everyone together? Or what kind of led to that first experiment where it happened? Yeah.
It might have been my idea. we had been doing some Ensemble programming, more actually before we did that, before we broke into such small teams, when we had slightly larger teams. It was interesting because I had been saying, hey, let's try this, and nobody wanted to try. We did, and this is a team that does 100% pairing all day, every day. So you think it'd be easier to just take that up a notch. But they were having a really difficult problem with the front end architecture being very complicated, and they were really having trouble adding new features because the newer people didn't know the code. And so they had the idea of maybe this would be a good approach. Maybe we should try mobbing. And they asked me to facilitate it. So I quickly went to Lisa Hawk's website, because she has a great series of blog posts with how she introduced it to her team, and copied everything she did, and started with shorter sessions. I think we did 2 hours, and people really did find it valuable. But they didn't find it valuable enough to do it all the time. But it was more when they had a hard, tough problem, then they wanted to do it. And they got to where they didn't need me as a facilitator. So that was good. But then we broke into these little tiny teams, and it didn't really make sense anymore. They still did some of it. So if there was a pod, we called them pods. If there was a pod with 2 developer pairs, they would often all work together. Yep. I wouldn't call it officially mobbing. They weren't rotating the driver navigator role. They were more just huddling. But they still found it valuable. So there are lots of different spectrums of things that help.
One question I like to ask teams that end up doing that is if the problem is simple enough when you're doing it just by yourselves or as a pair or whatever, is there something that you can automate about that process because it's so simple? And could you mob on automating the process that you'd go and do by yourself?
Interesting. I like that idea. That would be fun to try.
And usually it comes back with, oh yeah, we could automate everything that we would have been doing, but we're just going to do it manually instead. So just a thought, just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Cool. And it's cool that one thing I noticed about your story was that the goodness of ensembling, is that how you say the verb? I'm not sure. Is there, even if you're not following like the beginning driver navigator pattern, right? If the collaboration is there, then that's where the wins happen, right? And so whatever ended up working for your team. And it's funny, we recently, me and Chris were in a Lean Coffee recently where we kind of surveyed the teams, like what style of mobbing were they doing? And it was actually more in the minority, the ones who were still following the strict driver navigator, and the other styles were more loose. And I guess it's just another way to say find what works for your team, and it doesn't have to be what you watched in a workshop, right? First time you learned about it. So that's really cool. So I guess maybe the next follow-up question is, you were talking about some more recent ensembling experiences. I'm going to keep playing around with that word now.
Gotta get used to it, it's all.
Yeah. How have those been? What have those been like?
It's there's something I didn't turn off. Sorry for that noise. So actually, at the last company I was with, and then the current one, well, I've done this at a lot of different companies. When the developers are doing a pretty good job of automating their tests and stuff, but they're really not engaging in exploratory testing, then they're hoping the testers will do that. Like, well, we don't have enough testers. That's not going to scale. You're going to have to learn how to do that. And so for a long time, a lot of teams have done, originally people call them bug bashes, like just get a bunch of people and hammer on some new feature, basically ad hoc testing. But we want to take that up a notch and really do more thoughtful exploratory testing, make a better use of our time so we're not all testing the same thing. And so what we found really useful is to introduce the idea of test charters using Elizabeth Hendrickson's template from her Explore It book, which I highly recommend. And so it's pretty simple to teach people, like, use your personas, come up with well-focused charters that you can do in about 30 minutes. I think it's good to time box those. And sign up for them in advance. So like, make a spreadsheet, put the charters in, and then people can add their charters and then say which ones they want to do. And then also things like, oh, somebody needs to be testing on other browsers, or, whatever, different operating systems, whatever kind of permutations that you have with your product. And so that just helps organize it a little better. Not that an ad hoc bug bash is a bad thing, but it's just a little more organized, and people feel like it's a better use of their time, I think. And just reframing it. At the company where I work now at OutSystems, some of the quality owners have started calling them test parties, and they actually do make them really fun. They're going to have a test party, and they organize it. And it's like, one of the quality owners I work with, she had them split into a couple of groups. So one group did exploratory testing, using charters and stuff. The other one did do just ad hoc testing, and so that they could see, you get value out of both. And she actually, I think she had the product owners and designers in one, and the engineers in another, and how to do different things. So it's fun to experiment with different things like that and see what different things you find as a result of doing that. And then we also, Louise Perold is one of the quality owners on my team, and she organizes every couple of weeks or once a month our team. So we're all embedded in other teams, but as a quality team, we like to practice together too. So we get together and do an ensemble testing session on some feature that somebody's asked for help with or whatever. So it gives us a chance to kind of practice together and learn from each other. Plus we're adding value for some team that's trying to test a feature. So I think there are all kind of ways that can be beneficial.
So maybe kind of getting more directly practical here, what do you see are like maybe key differences between traditional testing versus ensemble testing, like solo versus what changes, what's the dynamic there for what have you
I don't have any science to back this up, except for I know that scientifically we know we have unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And that really is a bad impediment for testing, especially confirmational bias, availability bias. And how do you get yourself to think laterally? People say, oh, you just need to be aware of your unconscious bias. No, they're unconscious. I've actually done quite a bit of research. And there's no science that says being aware helps.
Yeah.
But we all have different perspectives. We all have different experience, different skill sets. And I think if you get that in a room, then you have a better chance of thinking laterally. And I have constantly seen way more ideas come out of it, and way more really serious and tricky bugs that are really hard to find come out of that. And the other thing that often happens is you'll get insights. A lot of times what ends up happening, especially if you're looking at something that was real design focused, like a report or particular UI, you start to really realize this design is just not going to work. Because you just get all these different people in there starting asking questions about it, and you suddenly realize it's like, we haven't even actually tested the feature yet, but now we should have looked at the design earlier. We didn't, but now that we did that, we see it's a problem. So then that prompted us to start saying, okay, let's do this with the lo-fi designs. Get a lot of people from, get a cross-functional group together and test. You can test ideas, right? You can explore ideas, you can explore designs, and so let's move this earlier in the process.
So I think I've noticed the same thing in Ensemble programming, and so that's really interesting. So I think that I've seen code that usually would just be acceptable to one person, be obviously untenable to a group of people, even with that same person in that group, and whether it's their code or not. And so that makes a lot of sense, is that maybe your unconscious bias, somebody else has a directly opposing unconscious bias. And
yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
And then you get to that point where you have this, that creates great collaboration or synergy of some kind, right?
And I see this with other, when I spoke at the Mob Programming Conference a couple of years ago, I did a session on visual testing strategy. Are you familiar with that at all? Not visual testing strategy, visual thinking strategy. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
VTS.
Go ahead and explain it. Yeah.
So that's a technique that's used by like medical schools and the CIA to help people be more observant and become better at diagnosing, for example. And to me, it shows the power of the group. So you actually have to have a fair number of people, at least like 10 people in the room to do this. But what you do is you show pictures of artworks, and you have to pick them carefully, like paintings that have people and something's going on. But you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on, and maybe the artist didn't either, right? It could be a photograph, could be a painting. And so then the facilitator says, what's happening in this picture? What do you see? And so people in the room are free to say anything. And what I've found, what people have told me in feedback when I've done this with my teams is it creates a feeling of psychological safety because there are no wrong answers.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. And so you can say, well, gee, I think these two people over here are flirting with each other. Well, what do you see that makes you say that? And that's the important question. What's the evidence for what you think? Well, because he's given her a flower and she's smiling or whatever. And what's interesting though is people start noticing things. It's like, oh, the window behind them is cracked. It's like, that's a window? I didn't realize that was a window. Or and you end up making up a story. Like I did this once. Maybe it was at the my programming conference. Anyway, we had this picture of a man sitting in a room with a big mastiff dog. And by the end, we had a story of he lived with his mother, and they lived in Queens, and we had a whole story sitting in the kitchen, and we had a whole story made up about him. And it just showed me the power of, I noticed something you didn't see, but now that you see that, you now see something else that I didn't see. And so I think that is one illustration of the power of getting a group of people together. And it's a great way to exercise. So as a tester, it's hard to practice testing. It's a great way to exercise our critical thinking muscles and our observation skills.
I like that as an idea of just, for mobbing in general, sometimes teaching mob programming or mob testing, it can get muddied by the code or the software that's in front of you. And so I think it's an interesting concept that might be a great exercise to introduce people to mobbing without the all of the pretense that comes with whatever your profession might be.
Or just use it as an icebreaker, because you can do it in 30 minutes. You do 3 artworks, 10 minutes each, and it's a really great way to get people. It's fun. It gets people kind of connected. It's kind of a team building deal, and then go on and do mobbing.
Yeah,
I haven't tried that yet, but I think it would be a really good way to do it if you were gonna mob for a couple hours.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and it reminds me of an experience I just had this morning where the whole bias thing, right? So, I mean, you simplify the world because it makes it digestible, right? So we're working on a feature, we're doing ensemble programming, not explicitly testing, but for us, we own the entire thing. We own the code, we own the test results, all of that, right? I mean, the product owner accepts it, but it's on us to test it well, not necessarily on him.
Right.
And so I think me and one person kind of simplified the world to like digest it and get something done. And we thought we had solved it. And then the third person in the mob was like, who often thinks very differently than me. It's a running joke between us how often we disagree. But we observed just completely different things in the code of the product. But he pointed out something about like, that works great, but what if they have a different hardware type? And it's just like, everything we were thinking just like completely exploded. And we're like, oh, you're right, we have to account for that. You know what I mean? But just, if we weren't ensembling or mobbing, it would have been like, I don't know, a week, days later that we would have discovered that, and we probably would have painted ourselves more in a corner. And so I think I'm just yes-anding to, yes, every day I see that multiple times over and over again from mobbing. So that is fantastic. I think maybe Chris segued into it a little bit, but what are your, maybe this will get a little controversial, I'm not sure. What are your experiences with people being resistant to collaboration in general, maybe ensembling, maybe mobbing, maybe pairing, and how have you handled that, or what are your experiences?
Yeah, that's difficult. People are not comfortable a lot of the time with those ideas, and I think there is a whole spectrum of reasons why that is. If I pair with somebody, they're going to notice that I really am bad at what I do. You know, and there's this well, everybody says, I mean, I've heard this from my team recently. Well, you know, oh, well, we could pair on something, but we know it'll slow us down. I'm like, what? It won't slow us down because we'll catch bugs right away or prevent bugs, and we won't have rework later because we paired on it. But I think that's just a kind of a popular misconception, and of course mobbing sounds even more terrible in that respect. It's just hard for people to understand. It's a cultural thing. So, you know, I've worked on XP teams and agile teams since 2000, and so there was always a fair amount of pairing. But then I would get on teams that were resistant to it. And then it was interesting when I got to Pivotal to see how their culture is designed to promote pairing. So some of that is a little too restrictive. It's like, oh, we have to all work the same hours. That doesn't work so well. But the fact that, okay, we're going to serve breakfast. So they're a really good breakfast. So that'll get everybody to work on time. And then let's start pairing. And well, we got ping pong tables all over the place so that while we're running our tests, we can play ping pong. And then we're going to have lunch at the same time, and then we're going to leave at the same time. And so, and more importantly, the physical, of course, is back when we had physical offices, the physical workspace was set up with 2 really nice Thunderbolt monitors and whatever your keyboard of choice that you carried around with you and your mouse of choice and comfortable chairs of choice, and making it comfortable and not cramming you together with somebody, having the mirrored monitors. And so that extends into our remote world too. Make sure everybody has good headsets, make sure everybody has 2 monitors so they got the video on one and what they're screen sharing on the other, having good bandwidth and having good working agreements, and you know, practices like doing, you know, agreeing we're going to do strong style pairing or we're going to do ping pong pairing or whatever we agree on, having kind of the rules around being respectful and doing, you know, yes and that sort of thing. And you know, debriefing at the end of the day, how did that go? I think that's a really important part that people fail to do. And so their whole culture is focused on it. And so of course they're really successful at it. Most companies don't even know that they need to do extra stuff to make it work. So, and you know, the other thing that makes it hard for me to introduce it is, you know, I'm basically a tester by trade. I can sit down and pair with you while you're coding, if it's if it's my turn to be the navigator, I have to just talk in pseudocode. It still is very valuable, I think, for both people in my experience. But it's hard for me to come and tell you, okay, you're the engineers and I'm the tester, and I'm going to tell you you should start writing your code as a pair. Why am I telling you that, right? It's harder to influence, and especially harder to influence when you can't sit down and just start doing it with them.
Yeah.
I can sit down and start doing it, but I'm not going to be writing code.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and that last point you made really made me realize something that I think part of my biases and simplicity of the world is when I think of mob programming or Ensemble programming, I'm typically thinking at it from a developer's perspective, like, oh, I know how to write code. And so to invite another developer to write code with me is not so scary, right? I mean, it is scary. It still has a lot of the challenges you mentioned, but you bring into that the distinction of a different skill set where one is comfortable with code and one is not. And I think it's probably easier for the person who is comfortable in whatever you're working on, if it's code, to invite someone else. But it's even harder if you're not as comfortable on the thing you're working on to invite someone to, because you're basically, it's hard to say it without it being perceived as like a, come teach me and I'll slow you down kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, right? That does sound, and it probably is going to slow you down in some respects, although still, if I'm pairing with you, I'm going to be thinking of probably better test cases. If we're doing TDD, I'll be thinking of, hey, we can do some exploratory testing at the start level before we're done. And those are some skills that you will keep using, right? You'll keep knowing that. So it's a way of spreading knowledge. And, like right now I'm pairing with engineers on the monitoring and observability team, creating dashboards in Kibana. That's something I'm still learning how to do. So, but what I always do ask them at the end of the session, was that valuable? And it always turns out that, as a QA person, I am a question asker. And so they always say, oh, you asked really good questions, or you had a really good idea about that. I mean, we could still have ideas and suggestions, whether or not we're expert at using the tool that we're using right now. So, but it is, there's just a lot of, people always would rather do what they're comfortable doing. And so getting out of their comfort zone, especially with another person. And, in the case of our company, and I know this is true of a lot of companies these days, we've got a language problem too, right? So we're all having to speak English because that's the official company language, but their first language is Portuguese or whatever. Now they got to talk to this crazy Texan who talks too fast. And that's probably just another layer of discomfort. And I am a person who is completely insane and pretty much right now living outside my comfort zone all the time because I took a job doing something I don't know how to do yet, but I just want to learn it. And I'm working with a bunch of other people who don't know it yet either. We're all learning together, and that's a lot going on at one time. So it's hard to also introduce new practices.
Yeah. Well, so in the Ensemble method, there's definitely a increased rate of learning from just, again, anecdotally, right? So I think that's probably a good strategy at this point. I think the different perspectives and harping on the different perspectives can actually maybe make that a little bit easier, is just saying, hey, getting somebody in here with a different perspective can be really helpful to us, and things along those lines. And the environment has to be,
just getting to try it a little. It's like, let's just try it for an hour.
Yeah.
I try to set the bar really low.
It doesn't have to be all the time. It just has to, provide some level of value. And in many cases I've seen when that happens, empathy is the only thing that comes out of it, right? But empathy has a lot of value in these situations, and a lot of people don't realize that that's one of the benefits that you can get, right?
Especially in our newly virtual world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, it made me realize the importance of something I've heard recently with, I know, Chris, you'll say like, is it a phrase like protect the space or, So, I mean, I think, Lisa, you kind of mentioned some of the things like physically, you want to make it easy to collaborate, right? Make the environment, whether it's physical or virtual, make the collaboration very easy, make it pairing and mobbing a click away, right? Or something like that. And now we're in the same video chat and we're sharing the same screen and it's not clunky. You know, I think all those things matter. But then when you're dealing with titles and skill differences, it's like the emotional and the virtues become so huge that it seems like it takes someone, whether it's the team members or a leader or a coach, to kind of protect the space emotionally and kind of level the playing field and be like, it's okay that you don't know. You know what I mean? It's okay. I mean, we were mobbing with some new people yesterday who were visiting. And I think we made it explicitly clear, like, it's okay you don't know. You're looking at a tech stack you've never seen before, a language you rarely have never used. It's okay not to know. You know what I mean? And I think if that isn't done up front, and it just kind of left with that uncomfortable air of like, oh, it's obvious I don't know what's going on, and you know what I mean, then I think it would make it very painful or uncomfortable, or, you know, maybe it would work out. But from what I've seen, if someone sets the stage and gets buy-in with that, then it probably just releases a lot of that tension. But
well, yeah, that goes back to, it's a really good point. That goes back to something we do have science for, that psychological safety is a prerequisite to everything else, to have high-performing teams. And I think that is a plus where I work right now, is it is a very safe and I think healthy culture where there's a lot of emphasis on helping each other, and also a lot of emphasis on questioning, asking why, and challenging and trying experiments, and I think that helps. So I've actually seen a lot more willingness to try things here than at the last company I was at, where for whatever reason, I think part of that might have been a time thing. Oh, we're so driven to meet the deadlines. I certainly don't want to stop and try and experiment.
Yeah, that definitely can always, you know, a compressed deadline, or even a deadline at all. Like if you say, oh, by next year we have to have this thing, and you've done no research into it, immediately it's how can I make as much progress as I can toward that, because I want to be done ahead of time or on time or whatever. And so you're immediately given a bias to jettison all proactive experimentation, right?
Yeah, and even if you know, like, there's good reason that doing something differently would make us go faster, I think when you're under pressure and you're stressed, you just want to go in your comfort zone. Like,
exactly.
Look, I can't emotionally handle doing something. You know, I got to go back to my comfort zone, how I know how to get things done. Now is not the time to learn and experiment. I got to, you know, and so, yeah. So I think I seen it more in previous cultures I've been at, where just a few statements from a leader or can just dramatically change the collaboration patterns of the team instantaneously. Collaboration patterns, the quality patterns, everything, because everyone just goes back to their comfort zone, whether it's faster or better or not. It's just, you know, I got to get it done, and that's the only way I want to do it right now. So.
Yeah, we humans respond to stress in interesting ways.
Nice. Well, Chris, any other questions before we close it out for the day?
I think that's it for me.
All right. So, Lisa, before we close the show, this has been fantastic. I've learned so much from you. And so I really hope to continue the conversation in many ways. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
Well, sure. Janet Gregory, my co-author, and I have, we've written 3 books now, but our latest book is much improved over the others in that it's only 100 pages long instead of 500 pages. So it's called the Agile Testing Condensed, a brief introduction. And so if you're interested in how can your team succeed with testing and learn how to build quality in an agile environment or a DevOps culture, it's a nice overview. So that is available on LeanPub as an ebook or Amazon as a print book, and we're also getting it translated into other languages. So we already have it available in Japanese, and we're working on Portuguese, and hopefully some others coming out. So we did that just because we're trying to share these ideas out, and very few people are going to read a big book anymore. So.
Well, congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so to all our viewers out there and our listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. And be sure to share this with anyone who you think will benefit from the content of this. and like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. Bye.